Record. Good morning, everybody, and happy and healthy holidays from Next, powered by Shulman Rogers. We are really excited to have you today for our December Pitchmasters workshop. Back by popular demand is Heather Lawver of Perfectly Pitched. Heather has been with us. I believe this will be the third time she's presenting. So definitely her workshops are in high demand. Nobody puts it better than Heather in terms of how to concisely, beautifully, eloquently, and elegantly both design your pitch deck and deliver your perfect pitch. So we're really honored to have her. My name is Lisa Friedlander. I'm excited to be here with Next, powered by Shulman Rogers. For those of you that may not know, Next is a award-winning and innovative legal model for services that we are focused on startup and emerging growth companies. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Heather. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat for Heather as we go along, and we will save time at the end to direct those questions. And again, as you know, this session will be recorded, so you can always go back and refer to it in your leisure. So Heather, thank you so much for being with us again. We are honored to have you and very grateful. So it's all you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that lovely intro, Lisa, and thanks for having me again. Let me share my screen. If someone could give me a thumbs up when you can see the good boy, I'd really appreciate it.
We can see him.
Awesome.
Adorable.
Thank you. That's our Chief Floofy Officer, Tiberius. Okay, let's get this started. Okay, so hello again, Pitchmasters. It's so wonderful to be here with you today. Thank you again for having me. Again, my name is Heather Lawver, and I'm the founder and CEO of Perfectly Pitched. And I'm excited to introduce you to the art of pitching, or how I learned to stop worrying and love PowerPoint. In startup land, two things are certain. First, every startup needs a pitch deck. And second, every founder needs to present. Yet, as vital as these two things are to every startup's future, why do they remain such a mystery? At Perfectly Pitched, we're determined to help founders like you demystify the pitching process using our unique tips, tricks, and methods that we'll go over today. Tips and tricks which, by the way, have helped our clients raise over $10 million in the past year alone. Best of all, that money was raised by 97% underrepresented founders. So let's dive in and increase your odds of getting funded too. To get started, let's take it back to the very beginning and talk about the goal of pitching. Lots of people will think, oh, it's to make money, to have investors fire up that money gun in your general direction. Actually, while money is wonderful and necessary, and yes, definitely part of the pitching process, it is not, in fact, your primary goal. Because getting that money, that investment, is dependent upon your ability to be understood. Over the course of this class, I hope to help you figure out how to present, to best explain who you are, what your business does, and what you need to succeed, to be fully, easily, and completely understood, so that yes, you'll make it to the stage where someone fires up that money gun in your general direction. Now, let's begin. In order to be understood, before you ever open up PowerPoint or Keynote, I want you to start with what I call the stoplight check-in. 3 simple steps that form the foundation of your journey moving forward. First, stop and ask yourself, what is my pitch goal? What is it I want my audience to understand? When they do understand, what do I want them to do with that information? When creating a pitch, that should be your first guiding principle. Is what I'm conveying truly helping me meet my goal, my call to action? If anything isn't serving that goal, throw it out. So much of what you keep versus what you discard depends on proceeding with caution and asking, who is my audience? What are their needs? What are their interests? What's their level of familiarity with the subject matter? Are you going to be talking to lay people or industry experts? That should radically change what you say and how it's presented. Ask this question each time you prepare for a new pitch, because each audience will be different and your pitch needs to reflect that. Which leads into the green light for moving forward. How can I connect with my audience's hearts and minds? How can I connect with them as human beings? How do I meet my needs and theirs Your pitch is really building the foundation of a relationship. It's not closing the deal, it's not all encompassing due diligence. Rather, it's the first impression you hope will lead to investment and a long time frame of working together. After all, an investor isn't just investing in your ideas, in your company on its own in a vacuum. They're investing just as much in you as a person, someone they believe can fully implement that idea. Your pitch not only needs to convince them of the idea itself, but they need to understand and believe that you are the person or the team who can make this idea a reality. That can't happen without building a relationship between you and your audience. Building that relationship depends, again, on three key factors. It all begins with empathy. You need to find a way to build common ground with your audience. What passions do you share? What pain points can we all relate to? It's important you find a way to build a shared experience. Shared experience is powerful. It's what bonds trauma survivors together, what turns a platoon into a band of brothers. Human beings are unique in that we can develop similar bonds purely through the power of storytelling. It's why two strangers light up when they find out they both love the same book or TV show. Think about how you can use storytelling to create that shared experience between you and your audience. It's so much harder to build empathy without authenticity. Try to always be your true self. By being bravely vulnerable, by being human, you will draw out the humanity in others. Being bravely vulnerable is a way to say to your audience without words, I see you. And in return, I'm allowing you to see me. That act of bravery builds a powerful bond of trust. Our shared emotions between presenter and audience will help to create lasting connection. Joy, passion, and pain, they're all contagious in a good way. We are hardwired to respond to the emotions of others, all to foster the building of relationships. A well done pitch can be the foundation upon which that relationship is built, one more likely to blossom into investment, productivity, and shared ideas becoming reality. The best and easiest way to convey all of these things, to create that shared experience of authenticity and trust, is through the power of storytelling. The human mind is hardwired for stories, whether it's the earliest humans telling each other our shared history around campfires, or a family sharing stories about our day over the dinner table, or my personal favorite, the all important bedtime story, shaping young minds while filling their hearts. Stories have a way of conveying deep truths while creating strong and lasting bonds. Indeed, the way our own minds are wired, the way we view who we are as individuals, depends on the stories we tell ourselves. Stories matter because they carry great power. The same is true whether you're reading a story to a child or giving a presentation. As the saying goes, tell me a fact and I'll forget. Tell me a story and I will never forget. As much as possible while preparing your pitch, be mindful of creating a cohesive and compelling story so you'll engage with your audience, connect with their hearts and minds by finding that common ground and being your authentic self so you can create relationships built on trust, all of which will help you to accomplish your goals. Now, to show you how to do that in detail, I'm going to follow my own advice and tell you a story. So get ready, get comfortable, and let's explore the entrepreneur's journey. Oop. Uh-oh. Sorry about that. Okay, how you got to this point in your company informs so much about your pitch, about the story you'll tell, and the stresses along the way, like when Stu messes up. So, once upon a time, you had an idea. You thought long and hard about whether or not you should pursue it, if it was worth it. You saw a pain point when you knew affected lots of other people just like you. You imagined a unique and wonderful solution. You could see a beautiful world unaffected by that awful pain point. You knew the market was hungry for a solution, giving you plenty of potential for growth. You figured out why you are the person to solve this problem. Maybe you even have a team who could help. Lastly, you figured out what resources you'd need to be a success. You thought about all of this and decided, yes, I can make this happen. And with that, you moved from idea to adoption. You took that idea, dove in headfirst, and decided to go for it, to make it a reality. With you and your baby of a company, you moved forward, made the investment, and started on your journey. Now, if you're anything like me, this phase, it can be so exciting, downright intoxicating. It's very, very easy, just like a kid on a sugar rush, to run up that hill so fast that you leap right over an unexpected cliff and crash right into Burnout Ravine. It's just like hitting a tiny pothole, which is a mild nuisance to a slow-moving car. But that same pothole can spell disaster if you're a race car driving at upwards of 100 miles an hour. The faster you're moving, the easier it is to crash and burn out. but all is not lost. If you're able, if you're determined, if the stars align, you'll pick yourself up, grab some crutches, and reignite that passion. But this time you're going to temper it with a little bit of patience and wisdom, not to mention the slower pace that inevitably comes with a healing leg injury. So, with that little bit of patience and wisdom, you learn from your mistakes, you adapt, and then you begin to scale. To implement your plans, to begin recruiting investors, climbing that first hill along the path to the highest peak of the mountain where success awaits. Finally, after that long, hard, difficult, emotionally draining climb, at long last, you reach the summit and achieve enlightenment. You are Abraham on the mountaintop, seeing all of history and everything to come. You can see everything, both the past and the future. It's beautiful and glorious, both in its entirety down to its smallest detail. When you think about telling your story in a pitch, you just know you have to tell it all. Anything less, and well, your audience, they just won't get it. They won't see the beauty that is everything. So along comes your audience. It's time to pitch your company, to tell that perfect, all-encompassing macro view of a story. But you only have 10, 5, or worse, only 3 minutes in which to pitch. What are you going to do? They need to hear it all in all of its glory. There's just so much info they need to know. So you grab your audience by the hand and run as fast as you can, or they have to get to the mountaintop right now. This is why it feels so impossible to pitch your business in 5 minutes, because you can't rush enlightenment. It took you months, maybe even years to get to that mountaintop. How can anyone possibly expect your audience to get there in a few minutes? Besides, remember burnout ravine. Just like that race car, the faster you try to get through all of this information, the more likely it is your audience is going to crash. Burnout ravine quickly becomes the Grand Canyon of info overload. If that happens, your audience is going to check out and not care to reignite a passion they never had to begin with. You just can't rush enlightenment. But the good news is, you don't have to. Your audience doesn't have to make it all the way to enlightenment. It's so much simpler than that. When it comes to pitching, all you need to do is get your pitch audience from idea to adoption while making sure that they trust and believe that you are perched on that mountaintop, seeing everything there is to see. So many founders think, how can I squeeze everything I need to say into my pitch? Flip that on its head. Ask yourself, what is the bare minimum I need to say to get my audience from idea to adoption? If you do that, then all those other steps in between, they can just go away, because all you need to focus on is how efficiently you can get from idea to adoption. Now, how do you get them there? The exact same way you got there. Remember all those questions we talked about that you asked yourself when you first began your journey. Those are exactly the same things you need to cover in your pitch. If we sandwich those between an intro and an outro, you suddenly have every chapter necessary for a perfect pitch. It all starts with an introduction. Who are you? What company do you represent? And a one-sentence slogan that provides an introductory summary. Think of it as a micro elevator pitch that lays a foundation of context, telling the audience what playground we're playing in today. And don't forget to include your name and email address so they know how to reach out if they want to come play on your playground. Next, a compelling problem. What's wrong with the world today? How many people are affected by it? Make it compelling, make it emotional, make it human. Next, your unique solution. How do you solve that exact problem? What makes you different? How much better will the world be because of it? Make this your Wizard of Oz moment where the world goes from drab and dark and that awful problem to bright, happy, and colorful with your solution. That leads into market and financials. This is just enough of your business acumen to convince the audience that you're the enlightened guru on the mountaintop, seeing all and developing plans for the future. Hammer that point home by explaining why now and why you. Why is now the right time to take action? What will they miss out on if they don't jump into your playground right now? And why are you the person or the team to make this happen? When someone invests, again, they're not just investing in an idea or a product. They're investing just as much, if not more so, in the people they believe will make it happen. Now, the penultimate piece of the puzzle, your ask for your future. What are the resources you need in order to reach your specific goals that you've already laid out? No matter where you're pitching or why, always, always have an ask, but it doesn't have to be money. Oftentimes when we ask for money, it's in order to hire help. So don't be shy. Ask for whatever it is you need. Sometimes, if people aren't willing to give their money, they can still offer their time and talents. So don't be shy. Ask for whatever it is you need, because you never know who in that audience will be the key to opening the next door of opportunity. So don't be shy. After all of that, don't ever forget to conclude with a grateful crescendo. Remind them of that compelling problem and help them feel the emotion of rising to that mountaintop of success, where the world will be so much better off because of what you could do together. Thank them all for their time and leave them with that positive, memorable impression that you're the enlightened, humble, and grateful guru on the mountaintop. Someone they want to work with, someone eager to welcome them into a better, brighter future. If you can convey each of these things, you will get your audience from idea to adoption. Once you get your audience to adoption, that's when they'll be so excited they just have to come talk to you. You'll start having conversations, follow-up meetings, due diligence, all that good stuff. It's during that process when you, in essence, give them a hang glider so they can have a nice, gentle ascent to the mountaintop where they'll join you on the rest of your journey. Now that you know your pitch only needs to get your audience from idea to adoption, it's time to cover getting from idea to adoption in a standalone pitch deck that's being emailed to someone to read at their leisure versus you giving a presentation, speaking to an audience, whether you're standing on a stage or over Zoom. More often than not, entrepreneurs treat these two as one and the same, but they're entirely different mediums. To me, it's like comparing reading a book versus watching a movie. They're very, very different experiences, even if they're the same story. And yes, that's little 16-year-old me in a photo from when USA Today covered my very first company. When it comes to standalone pitch decks, think of it more like a booklet or a brochure that's designed to be read alone at the audience's leisure with no other input from you, because it contains all the needed information in order to get that reader from idea to adoption. It's an entirely self-contained little capsule about your company, sent out into the world to tell your story while you're off doing other stuff. This is often the piece that gets you the meeting with the potential investor, where you can then give your presentation. Reading a pitch alone is a much, much different set of circumstances than when you're giving a presentation, standing up on a stage, or speaking on Zoom. Suddenly you have a wealth of tools you don't get in a book. In this format, you get to engage both sight and sound, maximizing the many different ways that human beings learn and retain information. This helps you to create a cinematic experience that's focused on you and your company as the stars of the show. It's presentations that I'd most like to focus on for the remainder of our time, as they're the most often misunderstood and usually the most stressful. They can appear to be a complex puzzle, one you're unsure how to build because you aren't even sure what the pieces are or what the end result should look like. I hope to break it down for you by explaining what I like to call balancing attention. Giving a good presentation is much like a juggling act, except instead of juggling brightly colored balls, you're juggling your audience's attention. That attention needs to be carefully and meticulously managed, split between you as the presenter and narrator and your slides. You are primarily an auditory source, while your slides are a visual source. This presents its own challenges to your juggling act because the human brain naturally focuses more of its energy on visual stimuli. The vast majority of our brain's processing power is devoted to interpreting signals from our eyes. 90% of the information being absorbed by our brain is processed visually. This means in order for you, the auditory source, to be the star, you have to be exceptionally careful in how you plan your slide deck in order to ensure that you remain the star of the show. Think of it as making sure every bit of that 90% of visual stimuli is there to serve you, to reinforce you, rather than distracting attention away from you. In short, the entire purpose of your slides is to make you look better, to make everything you say more impactful, to make everything about your presentation more memorable, because at all times, you should be Beyonce, and your slides are your backup singers. Everyone should be focusing on you, the star of the show, while the rest of their attention is paid to the backup singers, which only serves to reinforce how awesome you are. So you might be asking yourself, how can I be Beyonce? The trick is in following the example of Queen Bee's backup singers, all the single ladies. Now put your hands up. Notice her backup singers faded back, letting Beyonce carry on into the verse. After all, she has her backup singers for a reason, to make her shine. Naturally, Beyonce would lose a little of her luster if they sang every single word she does as she does. Beyonce is not and never has been a choir. This is not about many voices becoming one, but rather one voice standing up from the rest. Similarly, you don't need to put every single word you say up on your slides. It limits their impact. It makes them run together. And frankly, it kind of gets boring. After all, this isn't merely a projected printout of your script. It's not a teleprompter. Instead, reserve your backup singers, your slides, for the hook, the chorus, the catchiest bits of an earworm you don't want forgotten. Use your slides to highlight certain impactful keywords or visualize meaningful concepts and statistics. Whatever you want to really drill into those heads, that's what goes on your slides. Think of it as a sporadic echo, a visual scaffolding around your words to highlight and reinforce your most important statements. Finally, there is one deadly sin that backup singers should never, ever commit. Thou shalt not start singing that catchy chorus while Beyonce's about to sing the first verse. That'll get any backup singer fired because spoilers, man. No one wants them, whether it's a TV show, the big game, or your slides. Don't ever let your slides get ahead of you. Now, let's take a look at the Beyonce principle in action. Generally speaking, for the majority of your presentation, you should have 75% of your audience's attention on you and 25% on your slide deck. Every so often, you can shift up that balance for the sake of powerful imagery to create extra memorable moments, but the point is it should always be deliberate and planned. Attention must be wielded as a tool, harnessed and directed for maximum impact. That said, again, most of the time the audience's attention is there to highlight you. Just like with your backup singers, the catchiness of your song depends on maintaining this balance to ensure your audience is both engaged and absorbing information easily. The balance is maintained by ensuring your slides always visually represent whatever you are currently saying. When the narration matches the visual, what the audience hears and what they see effortlessly goes together, matching and ensuring they easily understand, comprehend, and remember everything you're talking about. In short, you aren't making them work for it. Information is flowing freely and easily. This balance goes awry when the narration either no longer matches the visual, or worse, your slides start getting ahead of you, showing seemingly disconnected images that have nothing whatsoever to do with what you're talking about at the moment. Or in other words, spoilers. All of this confusion means the audience isn't listening to you at all anymore. They're too busy thinking, did he click the wrong slide? Did I miss something important? I mean, is the puppy going to wear the turtleneck? I mean, I'd pay to see that, but what's with the windows? I am so lost. At this point, you could be saying that you know the true meaning of life, but no one's going to hear it. They're so confused that their ears have shut off, and you might as well not even be on the stage at all. No one in history has mastered the Beyonce principle better than Steve Jobs. Does the turtleneck make sense now? If this were a regular presentation, your audience's little aha moment would also be distracting them from what you're talking about. But anyway, when Steve Jobs introduced the iPhone, he famously filled the screen with the iPhone and only the iPhone. This ease and simplicity of pairing spoken word with immediately connected visuals is precisely what made Steve Jobs so revolutionary. To illustrate just how radical his approach was, let's contrast him with Bill Gates. It's just so busy. First off, not only does your eye not know where to go first, but it's literally chock full of spoilers. When he starts out with the first item, People Network, he's talking about that, but the audience isn't listening to him at all anymore. They can't help but read ahead. It's human nature. Half the audience is wondering what the heck other experiences for Microsoft and others is all about, while the other half is distracted by that sweet iMac in the corner. Now, whatever Bill's saying is going in one ear and out the other, because it's just too much. When everything is up there, nothing has impact. So let's go back to Steve Jobs. So much better. When Steve had a vital piece of information he really wanted you to remember, he put it front and center. No distractions. Literally all of your attention is on Steve and that number. In that moment, he is Beyonce, the star of the show. He is masterfully guiding your attention right where he wants it, telling his story to its fullest potential. Whenever Steve had more information to convey, he always did so in a clear, organized, easy to follow pattern. Your eye knows exactly where to go and what's being talked about. What's more, Steve never showed that entire list at the beginning. He understood spoilers. This is how he started. He introduced you to what he was talking about first. The iPad, a nice foundation of context. We know the playground we're playing in today. Then, as he said the next relevant fact, it appeared on the screen. Then the next. He's walking the audience through step by step so that no one reads ahead and no one gets lost. No one's taking their attention away from the star of the show. This is why Steve Jobs is remembered as a master communicator, because he always expertly juggled his audience's attention, utilizing their visual and auditory learning in order to balance their attention, focusing all of the audience's energy on him as he effortlessly conveyed his message, making it both impactful and memorable. This may feel like a huge legacy to live up to, a massive bar to reach, but you can do it. Just like juggling in real life, this skill can be learned. It's simple. Be mindful of your audience. Design your slides in order to manage their attention. And never forget, you're already Beyonce. You've worked hard to perfect your business, and you deserve a perfect pitch deck that emphasizes the star that you are. Now that we understand the basics of attention, it's time to move on to how to construct a presentation deck. Here I'll go over software basic design principles and general rules of thumb to help get you started. But as you grab your hard hat, I want you to ask yourself this one summarizing question. How can I make sure that everything in my pitch is always easy to learn? It's a matter of RESPECT. Making things easy to learn is a sign of respect for your audience, including their time. Are you conveying your message in a way that takes up as little of their time as possible? Their effort. Do you want your audience to feel like they have to expend precious energy and effort to understand what you're trying to say? Of course not. You want it to be easy for them, which means you need to put in the work so they don't have to. Lastly, it's respect for their attention. We all know attention can wander, so do your best to keep them engaged, keep them enthralled. Use every tool in your toolbox through humor, empathy, and good design, making sure you're keeping things engaging as a way to show respect to your audience. So much of what we'll talk about when it comes to construction is about how design can help make things easy to learn so that you can show that respect to your audience. So as we go through, please keep this in mind and think of design from the point of view of RESPECT to find out what it means for your pitch. Let's start with software. My personal favorite is Keynote, which I find the most helpful at offering guidance for good design with plenty of customization tools. And it's free if you have a Mac. PowerPoint is synonymous with presentations, but personally I find it a little clunky, but it is powerful. Canva has some free functionality, which is fantastic for startups. It does have some limited features, but it's a great solution for startups, and it is growing every day. Google Slides is also free, but has some limited design features, which I find frustrating, but it's great for teams, and it is getting better. Adobe InDesign is really cost prohibitive for early startups, so I don't usually recommend it. But it is great for print, especially. I know some people who use Adobe Acrobat, but I don't know why you would when both PowerPoint, Keynote, Canva, and Google Slides all export to PDF. Next up, color. Naturally, you'll want to stick with your brand book. If you don't have one, we can help with that. You want to make sure your colors, your overall style and branding are consistent, not only so you look professional, but most importantly, so you stay recognizable to your customers and potential investors. Once you get them from idea to adoption, you want it to be a seamless experience between your presentation to then when they go to your website to view other marketing materials in order to learn more. A great deal of that consistency depends on developing usage patterns, rules of how you will utilize color. For instance, as you'll notice, my headers in this section of the class will all follow the same pattern. The 2 bars of color on each side, the icon on the left. I'm color coding each segment so the colors will change, but the placement stays the same. You can use pattern and color to help train people subconsciously where to look for certain types of information. It also can help give them a sense of comfort that as they get used to the color patterns, they'll have some idea how long each segment lasts. You'll find patterns with all of my icons as well. They're always a colored circle with a simple white icon in the middle. Patterns matter. Find ways to create patterns and meaning and stick to them so that your audience will get used to how they'll find and perceive information. Lastly, contrast. You need to make absolutely certain that there's enough contrast between your uses of color so that it's always easy on the eye and easy to understand. If you lose contrast, things can become hard to read. It's not just about grays on whites, though. It's also about color on top of color. That's not only hard to read, it can be kind of painful to look at. Or if anyone in your audience has visual impairment, it could be impossible for them to read at all. So let's get rid of that. So much better. In short, be very careful how you use your colors to make sure they're always readable, clear, and looking their best. When it comes to fonts, there are a few good rules of thumb. Text that's too small can't be read. It probably looks okay-ish here on Zoom, but still not great. But what if you're pitching in a conference room or a ballroom? Remember, RESPECT. Make sure you're not making people strain to read what you have to say. So when you're designing text, it may look fine when you're sitting right in front of your monitor. But when designing your slides, I'd like you to stand up from your desk and take 10 steps back. Chances are small text will be a distant, unreadable blob. So make it bigger, make it simpler, make it easy. If text is too small, it simply won't be read. So it might as well just not even be there. Overall, there's just so much you can do to make text look dynamic. First, I'll show you various text design tools, then give you examples of how they're used. With text, you have size, obviously, weight, how thin or bold the font is, kerning, which is the technical term for the space between each individual letter. Next, opacity. It's literally just about fading into the background, but of course, be mindful of contrast. Then, of course, you can change capitalization styles, like with small caps and all caps. Don't use that one too often, but it's great for headers and emphasis. Now I'll show you a single sentence presented multiple ways to convey different meaning and provide visual variation. I can make it happen. Here, using all caps is emphasizing the word happen. But what if you want to emphasize something else? Let's use weight. I can make it happen. Same goes with opacity. By fading out everything but the word we want to emphasize, it's popping out and has the most visual impact. Or if you want a splash of style or want the whole sentence to stand apart from other text on the slide, play with its kerning. Overall, these are all great examples of one of design's biggest goals, directing the eye. Purely through design, you want the audience to subconsciously know where to look at any given moment. That means thinking about it consciously as a designer. So decide what's most important at any given moment. Then make sure you give it the most pop. The next component, honestly, is the most important and underutilized tool in the toolbox: imagery, specifically your icons and photos. Their importance cannot be overstated. Why? Because the human brain processes images 60,000 times faster than text. 60,000, that's huge. When you take that fact and combine it with what we discussed earlier, that 90% of the brain's information is absorbed visually, that means icons and photos are truly your most valuable assets at conveying information and making sure that information is retained by your audience. Combining words with images goes a long way toward helping your audience remember the information you're trying to convey. When it comes to our memories, words are stored in our short-term memory, quickly dropped, while images bypass that and go straight to long-term memory. There's even more power when the two are combined. When words and images are presented together in tandem, learning retention increases by a whopping 400%. This is why presentations are such a valuable tool and where icons and photos can become your most important allies. Try to find ways to highlight your most important keywords and make them stick by pairing them with a matching icon or photo. With all of that said, how should you choose your icons and images? To help with that, I'd like you to play a little game similar to 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, except instead of a classic B-list movie actor, we're talking about the degrees of separation between your concept and its visual representation. You want as few steps in logic between them as possible in order for everything to be easily understood. If you're talking about something concrete like an object, it's really easy. Talking about ice cream sundaes, ta-da, there's a banana split. With only 1 degree of separation, concept and visual are perfectly blended and everything's easily understood. Where it gets a little harder is with more abstract concepts, like back when I was talking about authenticity, trust, etc. This is where you just have to try your best to find abstract images that still convey the general feeling with as few degrees of separation as possible. For authenticity, that has 2 degrees of separation. We were talking about being your authentic self, so I went for something that looked vaguely like me since I was talking. Concept to me to image. 2 degrees of separation. That's still okay, but any more than that, and it'll be much harder for people to understand just how that image ties to what's being discussed. Trust is a little more straightforward. It's two people coming together in a handshake with a sense of mutual love. I'd say that's closer to 1 degree, maybe 1.5, but it still fits within the general feeling of the concept. So when you're choosing an image, think through how many steps it is between concept and visual representation. If there are too many steps, too many leaps in logic, just stick to words because the wrong image can be detrimental, confusing, and distracting. When it comes to icons specifically, the biggest advice I can offer is avoid using multiple different styles of icons all in one presentation. Not only does it look kind of messy, but it's also just visually confusing to the audience. Typically, the simpler the icons, the better, but there are always exceptions to every rule. Bottom line, it's important that no matter what you choose, that they suit the style of your branding and that you keep them consistent. When it comes to photos, please don't be afraid of using stock imagery. They're not all as bad as the cliche woman laughing at her salad or hide the pain herald. If you know how you want to visualize your concepts, if you look very carefully, you can find tons of beautiful options for free. You can find anything from happy kids to adorable illustrations, photos from the past or futuristic textures, messages of inspiration or editorial beauties. You can even take it a step further and make it look like you took the photos yourself by carefully matching them to your own branding, changing their look and feel, or better yet, drawing right on top of them to create something entirely unique to you. It's a great way to level up your use of stock imagery, to make it especially unique and make it look like you took the picture. Lastly, just as it's important to have high quality photos, it's equally important that they're carefully placed. So much of design is both making it easy for the viewer, but also making it appear that everything was placed thoughtfully, deliberately, and carefully. Basically, you want to avoid it looking like you just copy and pasted random images into a white deck or stole a graph you found off Google Images. Just because it's on the internet doesn't mean it's free for you to use. Please, please learn about photo and font licenses. There's also logo placed without bothering to find a transparency, let alone worry about if it's centered or not. Or the biggest sin of all, grabbing a stock image you didn't even pay for. Noticed nothing about this looks like any effort was put into it at all. Nothing there to say, I thought about this for 2 seconds. They're not aligned in any meaningful way, no rounded corners, nothing to make it match your branding. They're just kind of dropped there. Wait, I take it back. There is something even worse than the stolen stock photo. The horribly pixelated tiny photo blown up so you see every bit of compression. That one hurts my heart. Again, show your audience you respect them and that you respect paying for artists' time and talents, and try to make everything look careful and deliberate. Here are some examples of ways you can make photos look deliberate. Add some kind of subtle framing. Nothing crazy, just a little tiny something. I would, however, recommend you avoid just plain lined borders in most circumstances. You can round the corners, or if it suits the image and the spacing, round it off entirely into a nice little circled bubble. If you have a specifically shaped block of text and a specific shape for the picture, crop the picture to fit perfectly inside that space. If you don't know how to crop images, that's okay. Canva has cropping tools, so does Keynote and PowerPoint and Google Images, and all of those have free options. So all of these image tricks will help your content look more carefully designed and more thoughtfully considered. Notice they're all carefully and evenly spaced too, which brings us to the final piece of the components puzzle. Margins. Margins are all about what's known as negative space. It may sound like a real downer, but trust me, it's the happy thing. This is where math intersects with design. Negative space is all about your design elements and the space up and down, side to side, and in between, going all around each of the elements in your design. If you notice with our examples, the distance from the top of our pink boxes to the next element above it is precisely the same distance as from its bottom to the edge of the screen. That distance is also exactly the same as the space between the two boxes. Naturally, not everything can be all the same all the time, but you still mirror measurements where you can. Side to side measures exactly 475 pixels in both directions. If you're having a hard time measuring things, some software like Keynote and PowerPoint can show you exact placements based on pixel counts. Or you can cheat a little by creating what I call handy measuring boxes. I'll add them to my screen, move them to where I need them, size them to measure the gap, then move them around to make sure everything's lines up. Then away they go, leaving behind a well laid out slide. Here, negative space is providing balance and precision, all to please the eye and make it that much easier to absorb information. Now, watch how bad it looks when things go awry. There's literally no rhyme or reason to why these elements are now asymmetrical. No two margins are the same, nothing matches, nothing flows. It looks like things were just dropped randomly without thought. In fact, in several places, it feels kind of cramped. Believe it or not, tight, uneven margins have a significant emotional impact on the audience. They're known to increase anxiety and make people feel uncomfortable, rushed, or claustrophobic without even knowing why. Think I'm exaggerating? Filmmakers use this to their advantage all the time. Alfred Hitchcock pioneered classic horror filming techniques, all based on the psychology of margins and negative space. Now, next time you watch the movie Psycho, notice how when the scene starts out, there are generous margins in perfectly symmetrical shots. Things start to get a little tighter, but they're still symmetrical and even. At the first sign of trouble, we're starting to get a little off balance, but we still have well-placed asymmetry with mirrored balance, each subject balancing out the other. But then the threat appears. We're well into asymmetry now. The camera is tighter. The classic scream now asymmetric on the opposite side of the screen. The camera's getting tighter. The cuts are getting faster. She's in the center, but the knife, the attack, the world off kilter, that's off to the side. All symbolism and symmetry and margins. Now the cuts are frantic. The camera's unbearably close. Nothing is centered. Everything's off kilter. Until finally the deed is done, the woman is dead, the world's no longer upright, no longer perfectly balanced as it was. Horror films use these techniques to this day, and it's all based on the psychology of margins. So please, keep an eye on yours. Just like human beings who don't like to be cramped in small confined spaces, design elements don't like to feel cramped either. So make sure you always give them a little space. And just as I'm sure you don't want your audience to feel even remotely like this, try to find symmetry and balance wherever you can. Again, not everything has to be 100% exactly the same symmetrical. You just need to make sure if you introduce a design element or if you use a specific margin width, make sure it's mirrored somewhere else. That's all it is. Consistent breathing room paired with symmetry and balance, all to make it easy and comfortable as possible to learn. Now that we have our entire component skill set of software, color, font, imagery, and margins, it's time to get out our blender, combine everything we've learned thus far, sprinkle in a little seasoning with all the philosophies of Beyonce, ease of learning, and so forth, then whip it up to create our slide deck layout. When creating your layout, I'd like you to think in terms of anchors. Each element you create is a kind of visual anchor, a way to reassure the audience that when they're looking for types of information, they always know where to go, even if it's purely subconscious. Your first anchor is your header, being sure to bake in some kind of way to differentiate it from the rest of the slide area, either through typography alone or maybe a unique change of color or some kind of defining shape. Your header could go on the left, on the right, or in the center, but generally speaking, I prefer the left upper corner as we naturally start there, given that we read left to right, top to bottom in this part of the world. Regardless, whatever you choose, use it, stick with it. If you want a subheading, it could go underneath the header, but if you find that's eating into too much of your design real estate, you can find another place for it, perhaps in the upper right corner. But of course, be mindful of how long your subheadings will be, or if you even need them at all. Honestly, why add more words if you don't have to? If you have a simple enough logo, some entrepreneurs like to put it in the bottom right-hand corner. Some people will put little itty bitty confidential warnings in the bottom corner, but it's so small, no one's going to be able to read that in a presentation. Personally, I feel much the same way about logos. This design area real estate is precious. So if it's not readable, if it's not serving any defined, distinct purpose on each slide, why let it take up space? Besides, if your branding is consistent, they'll recognize who you are without needing to see your logo on every single slide. So save those for your email deck and get them out of here. Now you have the vast majority of real estate to fill up with your content. I don't know if you noticed this, but this presentation had lots of standard layouts. Why did I always group them in sets of 3? Because it's been shown that human beings are fantastic at remembering exactly 3 things at a time. Any more than that, and they'll quickly fade from our memories. So try your best to group things into sets of 3, even if that means organizing many items into only 3 categories or buckets. In addition to these big cards, you should also create lots of ways for presenting various types of information, each with their own rules about transitions that incorporate each item and how color and icons are used. Even if the size changes, the patterns can be repeated to ensure familiarity, continuity, and automatic ease of understanding. This way, the audience knows what to expect. It's one less thing they have to work for or think about consciously. Come up with your own various layout rules, whatever works for you and fits you with your brand, then follow through on them. Every so often, you can shake things up with bold, attention-grabbing text, but do this sparingly or it will start to lose its impact. If you have something truly extra special to say, splash a big, bold image on the screen and make sure when you're saying something extra important, they feel it. Also, incidentally, when formatting your text, do you see what I did there? The R lines up perfectly with the I, and the outer tail of the A lines up with the P. This is another way that margins can be used to create dynamic but bold and even looking text. Or if these are acting as transition slides, ending one section and moving on to the next, keep them a little more consistent if you can, and try to keep their design open, clean, bright, and happy. Think of them as a breath of fresh air, giving the audience a chance to close one chapter in the notebook of their minds and open a fresh, new, clean chapter, ready to fill it in with even more information. Finally, at long last, a quick word about time. The length of your pitch is not determined by the number of slides. Rather, it's determined by your script, by what you say. If you spend 10 minutes explaining a super crazy complex slide, you're going to spend the exact same amount of time as if you spent 1 minute each on 10 simpler slides. Same amount of time spent, but 10 times as many slides. The only difference? Your audience will thank you for using simpler, easier to understand content. So take your time and keep it simple. Speaking of time, ours is coming to a close. We have finally come to the end of this long and wondrous rainbow of information, finding the treasure at the end, where you'll create and deliver the most impactful presentations of your life, building relationships that will help you unlock all the doors of opportunity in your company's future. So let's pop the champagne because you did it. Yay, we made it through the course. Woo! Now I'm really wishing PowerPoint had some kind of graduation cap so I could ceremoniously have you move that tassel from side to side. Heck, I'm a designer. Let's make it happen. Move that tassel. Congratulations, perfect pitching graduates. You're now ready to make one hell of a perfect presentation. Now go get them because I believe in you. I don't just believe, I know that you are already that guru on top of the mountain. I'm so confident in your guru-ness that heck, I'm already right up there with you. Everyone here at Pitchmasters and Next is up there, and everyone in your network, and of course, your family and friends, not to mention your customers or user base. This is one crowded ass mountain, all built around belief in you. But as crowded as it is, I bet there's just enough room for your audience, for potential investors to join us up here supporting you. As you get up on that stage or start the pitch on Zoom, remember everyone is up here on your mountain supporting you. And most importantly, the audience is rooting for you to do well. Now it's just time to make it happen with your own perfect pitch. You know what to do. Start with your stoplight check-in. Make sure you know your pitch goal, that you've considered who your audience is, so you know how to connect with their hearts and minds. With that in mind, think about getting your audience from idea to adoption. And if you're struggling with how to put all the pieces together, remember your chapter framework. Use that to organize your storytelling structure, keeping the information flowing in a clear and logical manner. As you move into construction, always remember, believe in yourself. Be yourself. Get up on that stage, tell your authentic story, get your deck ready, and be the star that you already know you are. Just in case you need some help, Perfectly Pitched is here, ready, and willing to help you perfect your pitch. We're here for you. To help get you started, please check out perfectlypitched.co/resources. It's a page chock full of all sorts of amazing free stuff to get you started on your perfect pitch. Make sure you bookmark the link because it's not even listed on our site's main menu. You're getting an exclusive peek at it. So thank you very much for your time, and I really hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, jump off mute and let's dive into it. Thank you so much.
Heather, thank you so much. It was truly extraordinary. I mean, I've seen it now, like, I don't know, maybe half a dozen times, and every time I am still blown away and find new sort of tidbits and nuances that I maybe had missed the time before. So incredibly grateful. And the last 8 minutes that we have together, we do have a whole host of questions.
Awesome.
Andrew has put a bunch of good ones, but to kick us off, there was a question that he put in at the very beginning, which is balancing that storytelling sort of social emotional, pull at the heartstrings with the business case. And how do you do that effectively? And, knowing and understanding that different investors are going to want different things are going to appeal to them. You may get one piece of feedback in one investor pitch that completely contradicts the feedback that you got the time before and what you're going to get in the future. So can you address that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. The way I like to think of it is that I split the pitch into storytelling, hooks, and meat and potatoes, or what I call the fancy name for the boring part, which is all the business information. So I like to think if your hook is good enough, if your problem and solution narrative is so compelling and so emotional, that is the dessert first that makes them sit through the vegetables of the business information. So I always front load it with a really powerful emotional and human story. So if you have a bunch of statistics about how big the problem is, make sure you give them a face to connect with, a person to relate to and emote with that they care about, so that way they are emotionally hooked and invested in order to sit through the boring stuff. I always like to think of it as designing a children's book for grown-ups who like money. Keep it very simple, same kinds of things, find ways to visualize what you're talking about to give them pictures and people to connect to, and then they'll sit through the business stuff. As for advice, you will get investor feedback whiplash. It happens. What one investor likes, another one will hate. Generally speaking, that comes down to trying your best beforehand to figure out what type of investor they are. Earlier on, they tend to care more about the emotion and the story and the impact. And later on, they're going to want much more detail in your business plan. So try to figure out which kind of investor it is and then front or back load that depending on who they are and what their interests are. But yeah, I hope that helps.
Super. Yeah, very helpful. And to continue along that in terms of, if you have the opportunity to pitch one-on-one to an investor, and it goes by what you just said a moment ago, which I added to the chat too, which is knowing your investor and knowing what their investment thesis is. But anything change when you're if it's one-on-one, when you're going through your pitch deck? Should it be more conversational? What, if anything, changes for you when it's one-on-one?
When it's one-on-one, I try to keep any scripted part as short as possible because it should be more conversational at that point, but you at least want to lay the groundwork of mutual understanding. So at that point, I try to keep the actual scripted pitch part to 3 minutes or less. So, and then you have the part that you can go through conversationally, because especially in when you get into the meat and potatoes part of the business plan, they're going to have questions. There's going to be a back and forth, but you want to make sure you hook them with that emotional part first. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. And then when you're talking about the standalone deck, which I completely agree with, should be different from what you're presenting. There's also that executive summary, that 1 to 2 pager that people often use. Where does that fit in? Does that have the same purpose as the standalone deck? Which one should you use? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I like to think of the executive one pager as a tiny little appetizer Lots of people overload it with information and it gets overwhelming. You really want a one pager to be easily skimmable because they're going to spend less than a minute looking at it, probably about 30 seconds. So you want to visualize with icons like the top 3 bullet points you want them to get, a quick summary of what your problem solution narrative is, and then I usually put in a bulleted list of the general top points about what kind of company is it, when were you founded, who are the founders, anything like that. Just really quick, easy, skimmable. That is usually if you have a cold open or a friend introduction that you send that first, and then they'll say, oh, I'd like to see your pitch deck. Then you send the email deck, and that kind of builds on the one pager and adds a bit more business information. Then that's the piece that gets you the meeting, which you then give the presentation, which gets more personal and more storytelling and that whole cinematic experience. So think of each one as a building block, slowly adding more context.
For the next. Yeah, absolutely. And then just technical, easy questions. Did you use Keynote for this, for your presentation?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And then in the font, sort of the minimum size, was it 24? What's the minimum?
I hesitate to say an exact number because certain fonts will be slightly different. I mean, it sounds like it should be standard across all fonts, but it's really not. So generally speaking, I like to say no less than 24, but it's really going to vary by font. And also keep in mind that email decks are going to have a completely different font size need than a presentation deck. For a presentation deck, I really want you to take stand up from your desk, take 10 steps back and see if it's readable, and make sure that you are aware that your pitch will be delivered in multiple different scenarios. There's Zoom, there's ballrooms, there's conference rooms. You really want to design for the person in the back row of whatever that scenario is.
Got it. Okay, great. And some people are chiming in that they've been told never, Catherine was saying, never send a deck, send an email and then a deck. In my experience as an investor, I want something, whether that's a brief deck or an executive summary. I'm not going to meet with you unless I have a little bit more information. I don't know if anybody else has different thoughts, or Heather, if you have a thought on cold email with nothing, just asking for a meeting, or including some information.
I would always include some information because to me, it's a sign of respect for the investor that investors are busy. They get literally thousands upon thousands of decks and emails and requests for meetings every single year. The average investor will spend less than a minute deciding on your email of whether or not they want to meet with you. So give them something to sink their teeth into and to whet their appetite and think, yes, I really need to learn more. So think of every email, every one pager as a tiny little trailer for the movie that is your business, and give them something that they're like, yes, I'm so excited about this. I have to learn more. So it needs to have something.
Yeah. We have 1 minute left. Any questions? I hope I did a good enough job in the chat. There were lots of great questions. Unmute yourself if there's one that didn't get addressed, and we've got just a minute or two to respond. Any final questions for Heather?
I will say, if no one has any other questions, there's one other thing I wanted to address. And talking about time limits, I want you to always think about this Albert Einstein quote that I love. If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough yet. The shorter your pitch, the better your one pager. You're not only saving the investor time, you are demonstrating the amount of knowledge you have of your business and your industry. When you can explain it simply, you are demonstrating mastery of your topic.
And then one last question. Do you have a word per minute sort of guideline or anything like that in helping people figure out what their script should be?
It's not necessarily a word per minute, but I do have a pitch framework I can share if anyone wants to email out, where the framework that I shared in the class, especially if you think of each subject, each chapter in that little storyline needs 1 to 3 bullet points tops of basic, like one sentence things you want to get across. Some things only need 1 bullet point, like the intro. Some parts need more, like your business plan. If you do 1 to 3 per chapter of that framework, you will end up at about 3 minutes.
Perfect. Well, on that note, Heather, we are incredibly grateful. You are always extraordinary. And as I mentioned, every time I see it, I learn more and more. Thank you all for joining us today. Again, happy and healthy holidays to all. Look for an email from me later this afternoon with the recording for today's session. And once again, we are very grateful to having Heather here. Reach out to her. In my email, I will have her contact information as well. So thank you all, and happy and healthy holidays. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye.